Hello, I'm Somi Arian. I'm the founder of the think tank for women in business and technology and the FemPeak platform, with the mission of raising women's socioeconomic status. I'm super excited to tell you about today's guest, who's a very special woman. Hélène Guillaume is the founder and CEO of WILD.AI, a really cool app for female athletes that helps them keep track of their cycle and to work with their own body to maximize their performance. Hélène studied mathematics and financial risks. She was a quant in a hedge fund and a management consultant for Fortune 500 companies in artificial intelligence. She was also a rugby player, and she's an ultra-marathon runner, triathlete, and ice swimmer. That's how cool she is, and I cannot wait for you guys to hear our conversation. So let's get into it. In honor of your brand, I'm wearing yellow and black.
Thank you.
I was looking at your new website, and actually that yellow color is my favorite yellow. It's like
Really?
basically, yeah, I'd say yellow is my favorite color. I do also really like pale pink and pale blue. But in terms of like, if I wanted to wear something, it's always like yellow is my favorite color. And
it suits
really
you very
like
well.
Thank you. So let's start by the very first thing I wanted to talk to you about. I really like your tagline. Your female physiology is your unfair advantage. I really love that. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, what does that mean, and how you came up with it? You know, because when we look at the 10 factors that impact women's socioeconomic status, the first one is biology. And this, when we say impact, it doesn't mean that it impacts negatively necessarily. It's about how, you know, like even if you perceive it as something that may not be necessarily to your benefit, you can turn that around and make it to your benefit. So I really love that approach. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so basically, I think like just the marketing on women was wrong like the whole time. So we've heard all life that being a woman is annoying and women are moody and bitchy, and people use very easily words like, oh yeah, but she's a woman, so like we can't understand her. And just like for me all my life it's been something negative, like a negative connotation being a woman. As a little girl also like, oh, like run like a girl, you shouldn't do these sports because you're a girl. Basically like very basic things that are a part of really of our culture, and discriminate females in a very important way. And a lot of women actually do not feel that way, but for me it was always very present, and I always felt it wasn't cool to be a girl, and then it wasn't cool to be a woman. And I myself, when I started my career in like very male-oriented environments and like quant and trading, I was also starting to discriminate my own gender and starting to have a behavior that was assimilating myself to the caricature of the successful man, which was like very aggressive, basically things that were not me deep inside, but that was I was behaving that way because that's the examples I had. And I was doing sports, and whenever I'm like telling my story, I say like I was a rugby player and I was a quant, people like raise eyebrows and they're like, oh, you were playing rugby? I'm like, yeah. You know, like a lot of women are playing rugby and playing soccer. By the way, soccer is a female sport in the US, and women are doing sports, and I always loved being outdoors and doing sports. But for some reason, again, like when I'm talking about my company, they're like, oh yeah, female sports is a niche. I'm like, well, look outside, like it is not a niche. Like women are doing sports and women are participating, and it's not a niche. Like women are active. And by the way, women were never these weak little beings. Like women are superhumans. Like we're able to create humans, which is like the ultimate tech dream. We can do that while still working, while still racing, and while still carrying a child and things. So like I think just the marketing really on women was entirely wrong the whole time. The issue is that we did not know how to fuel correctly the body, how to train the body, and so we were, as women, were fighting against these things that were happening in us and treating it as a disadvantage. So having hormonal changes and having cycles, we thought actually like I am underperforming certain times, so it's shit. The reality is that we are having this cyclical thing, and if we are understanding how to show it correctly, what the body needs when the body needs it, then we are actually like overperforming better all the time, and overall we are performing and feeling much better. So that's really the research behind. So what is woman? What does the female needs depending on where she is in menstrual cycle, where she is in her life stage, whether she's taking contraceptive or not, whether she had a baby or not, in perimenopause, etc. And so that's what we do, research on the female body and translate that research into an app helping women train, eat, and recover based on their menstrual cycle.
Very interesting. We have such a similar story in that sense. It's amazing. It doesn't really matter what culture you come from. You can always find points of similarity. And you know, for example, although I grew up in Iran, I had the same kind of feeling about, you know, like, for example, since a young age, I wanted to go into politics because I felt like that was the way. That's why I ended up working in an embassy, and, you know, and from there, because I thought I had to go into positions of power to be able to overcome limitations that were put around me, you know, and like you say, exactly. I always felt like from an very early on, I realized that my father wanted a son, and he actually told me that if he had a son, he wouldn't have had any more kids. So like basically he was kind of disappointed that I was not a son. And then after that, if my mom had my sister, he was like, if my sister was a son, then he wouldn't have any more children. So basically he would keep having children until he has. Unfortunately, the third one was a son. So I had a brother, you know, and it just felt like I wasn't enough, or I wasn't good enough. So like you, when I went into the work environment, and you went into sports, I went into music, and I went into heavy metal music and death metal. You know, I was in a death metal band, you know, which is like very male oriented, and I kind of felt like always I had to behave like a man, you know, be like a man, you know, to be able to compete and downplay kind of my femininity. But that changed. And at some point, you know, especially I think it was around when I was in the band, you know, that I felt like I didn't want to be wearing black all the time, you know, and I didn't want to have loads of tattoos and like feel like sit down and like drink beer, or like I was like really into a healthy lifestyle, and everybody else was like drink beer and like do drugs, and I was like, I don't want to do these things, you know, and I felt like I just didn't fit. And then I thought, you know, I'm going to embrace my womanhood, you know, and for a very long time, I did feel that the menstrual cycle was a big problem for me. You know, it was like I still have, if I don't manage it, I can have like really bad PMDD. It was like a lot of learning and trying to do research to understand the cycle and to understand. I can see that you're wearing an Oura ring, you know, like this has had a huge impact on understanding my body. So when you talk about, when you were on the panel, you talked about the fact that we don't know enough about the female body, and we don't know enough about, you know, female biology. Why do you think there's this huge data gap when it comes to women? Because in my experience, it's been that when I talk to men about it, is that it's just so complex that they give up. It's not standardizable, you know. So like we give up, and I think that's why we need to have women to do that, right? So tell me about your experience in terms of understanding. Where did you realize there was that data gap?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Like, you know, like I love having like being at dinners with like tech people, and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna solve that. I don't know, like sending satellites in a way that is affordable. But then, oh, female physiology is a bit complicated. I'm like, come on, guys. I do understand that you're a guy and you're a man, and you don't necessarily can put yourself in the shoes of a woman. And interestingly, like they would understand from my experience fundraising, for instance, like cancer research. They would understand a product that is cancer research. They might not invest in it because biotech, whatever, but they may understand it because they can relate to it, because they think somehow it could also happen to them, unless it's like very specific female cancer. But think that a female related, they can't, although they do have wives, kids, like daughters, mothers, aunts, sisters, whatever, but they really don't relate to it. So there's this very interesting discrepancy between the man and the woman, and the man really does not think that the female life is something that they should care about. And so I had meetings with investors. They were saying like, oh yeah, it's like female things. They were a bit like, they feel a bit awkward when I start talking about like periods and sex drive and like vaginal fluids. They're like, ooh, it's super weird. And I'm like, well, you know, like if you are not into women, that's one thing, but you still came from a woman. So like if you do not, you're not interested in that, you're basically not interested in your own species. And it is like the equivalent of being like in a panel on like the environment and saying like, oh yeah, I really don't give a shit about the environment, because like I live like in front of beach and I have a beautiful swimming pool, so I don't give a shit, and like that is the exact equivalent, but still people would feel okay to say that they are not interested in female physiology. So that's the background, and then it is complex. We are not linear, and that makes us fascinating. Like, I mean, coming from a scientific background, like issues that are complex are really interesting. And so in my team, we get really motivated by the fact that it is not linear, we're changing all the time, and it's a moving target. When you think you solved an issue, you actually have another one. So for instance, like if you look at contraceptives, you have like all these plethora of contraceptives. So we are addressing all these different contraceptives. A coil is very different than a pill, that is very different than an implant. And then the woman changes, she wants to get pregnant. So like we still need to serve that woman, she's the same person, but she wants to get pregnant, she doesn't get pregnant, she has an abortion, a miscarriage. Then we solve that, then she's going into perimenopause. And then, so it's this ever-changing body, and we need to address that, but it makes it fascinating. And so, yeah, a lot of scientists and a lot of places have put themselves, gave that excuse that it's like just too complex, and so it's fine not to take care of it. And I'm talking about like all the medical world, like all the drugs, etc. Like all the research is often done on men because women are like can get pregnant and the women have menstrual cycles. So that's the background. But I think like people like me and my company, and there are now women who are changing things, and men as well. And in my team we have men who are incredible. And so yeah, I think it's now the age to change these things. The very incredible things, like when you are aware that it's such a big opportunity, it's huge, it's massive, like there's so much money to be made. So that's the interesting thing.
I think this is a fascinating time for female entrepreneurs and people looking at femtech, because I think the opportunity is incredible. In a way, I'm not even deterred by the fact that a lot of investors may not be interested, because technology has made it possible now to have a very good head start without a lot of money. Like for example, with the FemPeak platform that we're building, since July until now, I've maybe spent about 30 to 40,000 pounds to get to the point that we got, because we first built our first prototype of the platform, which costs about 8,000, and it wasn't very good and it wasn't performing well. So then I got another team and they're building it from scratch. But we learned from that, right? I felt like I don't really need to go and raise money to do that. I already have a company that is making money, and I'm taking that and building this to a point that then I can show proof of concept. So I think in many cases now, technology is making it possible and a little bit cheaper than before to get to a point that you have proof of concept. You just need to be very smart about how you do that and try and work with what you have. With a smaller team, sometimes it's about getting the right people on board, maybe giving them an equity. And like there are many, many, many ways of doing it. And then when you go to, because this is great for female entrepreneurs, because when you then go to investors, then you are asking for a bigger share. Why? Because you've done the hard work, like you've built that initial momentum. So I wanted to ask you about your experience with like how you're going about building it from an investment point of view. How did you find it when you started talking to investors? What was the reaction, and how did you overcome that? Because I think a lot of women watching this or listening to this are people who, like us, want to build businesses around femtech or around female market, whether it's health or not. And it would be good for them to get an idea of, maybe they could learn something, some kind of advice that you might have.
Yeah, a friend of mine told me early on, men don't relate to it unless they have a daughter. Interestingly, even if they have a wife, they may not relate to it. And my question often is like, have you ever bought Tampax? A lot of men have never ever been in that area of the supermarket. It's like the weirdest place for them. It's like completely taboo. And I'm like, well, we do buy toilet paper for you, and you know what you're doing with toilet paper, whereas like the Tampax goes in an area you play with. So like I don't really see, and there's like this remaining taboo on like period sex, etc. Whereas like, I mean, it is a quarter of the time of a woman between 13 and 52 years old. We're basically bleeding, like if you go put it back to back like 8 years in a row, and it's like such taboo. So like, first of all, like a lot of men, adult men, are still very uncomfortable even if they have a wife. But if they have a daughter who often is going through puberty or has gone through puberty, I think it's a different generation, and they seeing their little girl and they do not understand what is going through them, and then they really realize that they're not making things up. Like they are having these pains and they do not understand their own bodies and they're struggling and it's difficult. Like puberty for a girl is very different than for a boy. Like a boy is like it's getting like muscles and testosterone and everything's growing, it's feeling great and greater. A girl is like going through these massive changes and she's bleeding and she feels shit and she's like going to sports and she can do it, but the teacher is like, yeah, come on, like don't be moody and bitchy and run like the other kids. So she's like she has this internal struggle with herself because she's told that she's acting in a way that she shouldn't, but she really feels. So she's learning to basically ignore her own body. So if you are raising men who have daughters, often they are relating quite well to that. And then like, yeah, some investors are like, they just, if they don't relate to it and they don't see the money opportunity of being in femtech, they're just stupid. And if they don't want to invest, obviously like they have their own allies and criteria. Yeah, I think like being very resilient, knowing that we're worth it, like knowing that we're doing something that is so worth it. And like when you have a meeting with an investor who's saying like, yeah, like this is a niche market, then just talk to other women like us, like, because it is a huge market. And then when I'm seeing like on Instagram or on LinkedIn, like the messages of women that are using our app and they love it and it's changing their life and it's changing their behavior and they understand more and more their body and it empowers them and they feel so good about it. It's like so rewarding. So yeah, just like go for it. It's huge, these markets. So it's very fun.
Yes, definitely. So tell me a little bit about your own background in sports. From what age did you start playing sports? And I know that you also have a strong background in mathematics. I'm going to come back to that separately, but let's talk about sports first. So you got into sports from an early age, then you realized there was something different about your body as a female. So tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I've always done sports. So I think like from the youngest age, I was swimming. I mean, like as far as I can remember, swimming or skiing with my dad and my sisters, and horse riding, like things that kids would do, but always being very active. I was very lucky. We have 3 daughters, but I was very lucky. My dad actually adored having daughters. He adores having men now, so he can drink whiskey with them. But he adored having daughters, and he treated us not as men, but he treated us as like his kids, and he did what he wanted. He's really young, so I've still like 2 weeks ago I was skiing with him. Yeah, so I did sports all my life with him. I think like I did want to prove things to him as well. My relationship with my father is very much based on sports and business. My relationship with my mother is very different, probably more like introspective. I've always so I've done like competitive swimming, and then I got into triathlon. Oh no, before that I was a semi-competitive, semi-professional rugby player. Then I got into triathlon and like running ultra marathons. I do basically whatever I can touch. Now I'm really into surfing and so yeah, I love moving my body. So I never really associated the fact that sports is not for girls with me, and I thought like, well, I do like it, so maybe it means that I'm not a girl, so I'm a tomboy. The tomboy word in French is a failed boy, is a garçon manqué. It's pretty hardcore when you think about it. So it's like you try to be a boy, but you really failed on it. And it's just because I liked climbing trees and doing outdoor stuff. And so it's such a wrong messaging to send to a little girl. And then so I was doing a lot of sports, and then parallel to that, I studied mathematics and financial risk. I started my career as a quant in a hedge fund, and then went into management consulting. My big client was Fannie Mae in DC on how to optimize internal risk models using AI, so very much on the data science side. And I was seeing all this data that we were using in financial modeling to take smart investment decisions, and then in sports and my personal health, like all this data that we gathered on ourselves, on our bodies, like from watches and Oura rings and blood tests and smear tests, etc. And it was all scattered around, and we couldn't understand our bodies. And yeah, with like basically doing the link, I created WILD.AI to understand all these metrics in our body and understand that being a woman is not an anomaly. And if we're having all these things, is not an anomaly. And I think like the analogy I like is like if you are climbing a mountain, you have this objective in your head, which is the summit, and the path might not be very easy, but that's fine. Like it's part of the game. And being a woman is like, yeah, every day is not like the best, and every day is like sometimes a bit harder, sometimes amazing. But if you know that it is not an anomaly and it's totally normal, and you have things actually that you can do to feel amazing every single day, this is part of our life. Basically, our bodies are made as such that we are these super machines that you give us a drop and we make babies out of it. Our whole body is basically creating a whole human. Like you talk to a pregnant woman and she's like creating a limb and like a palm and whatever. So it's quite fascinating. We've been treating it as an anomaly. So you still have like, in the general lingo, you have like health and female health, sports, female sports, Adidas, female Adidas. And so we need to flip that. So that's like the origin of why we created WILD.AI. But at the very beginning, Wild was a company for men and women. And then we cut out the men, and it was really hard because we had all these men who loved it. But then we realized that we had to really focus because there was so much research to be done on female, and that if, again, we were still serving the men, we were, again, not doing our job properly. And that's why a lot of companies are not serving women specifically. They are first serving the general population, which is the men, and then a subset of it is the women. So women are using Oura Ring, who tells me my body temperature and my resting heart is going higher, so I'm going to get sick. True for men, for women, I'm just ovulating. So we are reversing that. We're first of all serving women, and second, men can use it as well if they want to. You can lie and sign up in the app and say you're a menopausal woman if you're a man.
That's very interesting. Do you think that the fact that we have this, see, for me, we talked about this before, and you promised you were going to answer that question. Is the period a feature or a bug? Because to me, I feel that it's a bug, because I know that it's because we make babies, right? But we don't make babies every month or every year, right? So I really think it's an evolutionary bug.
You know, I love this question, but I think it's really interesting. I was having this conversation with a guy the other day, and he was like, it's really unpractical to have periods all the time because we need to be careful all the time, basically, that you can become pregnant. So there's a flip way to look at that. It's like, yeah, it can be a bug, but it can also be like an incredible thing, because as women, we have this menstrual cycle, which means that monthly, and this is non-scientific, so my team would not allow me to say these things, but on a monthly basis, we have this time, or we're going more inwards if we're respecting it. So we should be going more inwards and do less aggressive workouts. This is like before period, so like the premenstrual symptoms. And this is actually, if you think about it, it's not unreasonable to like every month have some time where you're like a little bit less like pushing. And then you have the rebirth, which is the bleeding. So the 2 first days are still like part of that like internal introversion part. And then the third day of the periods, a lot of women actually have really high sex drive, and all their metrics are on the top. And like from that point up to ovulation, they really feel really strong, and they really are like, yeah, their bodies are extremely functional, like at their best. And then after ovulation, again, like you have this time where you are going back a little bit inwards. And if you think of like seasons, like winter, like, you know, the nights are longer, and like, again, it's not unreasonable to think that you should be like sleeping more and spending more time inside, and then in summer you can do a lot of things outside. So men could also follow that. And I think like now with lockdowns and COVID, like people are rethinking how they're living, and it's really not unreasonable to think like that. And then if you think that it's a bad thing, like I think like the analogy would be like a man is a tractor. Like every day he's performing, and he's dying a bit earlier than us. And as a woman, we're like Ferraris, like we overperform and then we go back, and then we like rest a bit, and then we overperform. But because we have these cycles, if we do respect it, it's really incredible, and it is totally fine. And then we live longer because we have like a natural dialysis every single month for having bleedings. So I think like that's the whole thing that we need to demystify. It is magical, and when you are more in tune with your body as a woman, so I've been in the same journey as you, like trying to understand that womanhood is incredible and is powerful and is great, and bleeding is also powerful. So like accepting that as part of being a woman, and now I actually learned it is not annoying. And then you can embrace it, and you can feel the magic of it, and a lot of like more ancients, or like a lot of people would say like it's very woo, but they're saying like embracing this womanhood, and yeah, we have things that the norm, like the men, do not have, and it's fine.
That's very interesting. Definitely. I was actually speaking to my best friend last night, and I gave her this exact analogy of the seasons. And I was thinking, you know, there's a gentleman who wrote the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, right? He says that women are like the weather. It gets better by itself. Now, I think that it's not necessarily like the weather. I think a woman is like more like a city. So like you have, each city has a characteristic to begin with, right? But then it has a weather, it has its own seasons, right? So for example, I'm New York because, I have a lot of energy and I'm like really fast paced, right? But then I still have seasons within New York, so you have like, for me, like the first day of spring is like the first day of bleeding, right? Because the first day of spring is still like you have the remnants of the winter, One of those people is like, I'm really in tune with my body. I really think about, because I meditate and I think a lot about how, or feel, very, very much like what's happening, right? I notice every little change. And one of the things that's very important to me is my cognition, because I'm always reading, learning, thinking, being creative. And I really noticed that a few days before, until the first couple of days, my focus is just really a lot lower, and it's much harder for me to focus. So now I'm taking all the supplementation to make sure that, that I can function. I know that I won't be at my peak, but I know at the same time that I can manage it, because we live in a world where the world is not going to stop for you. Like if I have to give a talk, if I have to, be in a meeting, give a presentation, be on a shoot, it's not going to stop because I have the first day of my period, So that from that perspective, sometimes it felt to me that maybe it is a bug. When you think about for the world that we live in, it feels like it hasn't evolved for the speed of, life that we have. Sometimes I wish that I could at least lengthen the cycle, but then I suppose if you lengthen the cycle, you still have a longer period of the downside of it as well. So but it's a difficult one, but it is fascinating. It's a complex thing, and I'm getting more and more fascinated by its complexity.
But I think like on that point, like we're a bit like naturally schizophrenic, or have like bipolarities in our own personalities. Like when we have like the premenstrual symptoms, we are like probably like more creative, more inwards, more like emotional. But like, since when being like having emotions is a bad thing? Like, I don't know, like there's this like, I don't know, hedge fund like character that says like you need to be like this shark every single day, and that is the only way of behaving, especially if you're a founder or like a C-level professional. But like that's like, where did that come from? Like, where did we initiate that thinking? So actually, like the interesting thing is like, as a woman, like when you can be in tune with everybody and understand, you can actually like, if you're having a presentation and is more like on the inward and emotional side, like, well, you probably connect better with the audience that is like having troubles. And by the way, like a lot of men have depression, so it's not like they are overperforming all the time, like not at all. So like they kind of like hide behind the fact that they're not bleeding, but actually like they're not better than us or anything like that. Again, like demystifying like what is a woman, demystifying the fact that it is quite incredible, and like really understanding what it means and embracing it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Speaking of creativity, some of my most creative ideas actually come to me around that time when I go inwards. Tell you a very funny story. I had a date a few days ago. The person was like, "How was your week?" And I said, "Yeah, it was very interesting. I had all these different things." And I said that I'm reading this book by Douglas Murray, who has written a book about race and gender and all of these things. And I said that he makes some interesting points and I would really like to interview him. And then I mentioned, which is a question that I wanted to ask you about in a second, about women and math. I said that he mentions another person that I'm really interested in interviewing, Eric Weinstein, who's a mathematician, but he says that women are not as good in math. And then this person that I had a date with said that, yes, that's right. And I said, you can't say that because we don't have enough data about women having done math because for a very long time, women were not even allowed to go to school. When you look at the historical data of women in science, like for example, Henrietta Leavitt, right? She wasn't even allowed to touch the telescopes. And she still came up with the calculation that made us realize that the universe is expanding. And then when she died, she was going to potentially be given a Nobel Prize, but she died of cancer. So Hubble took that credit, and now we know of Hubble telescope. So as a woman, she was not even allowed to operate the telescope, to go into that room. So you cannot say that women are not as good in math or physics or things like that when they've not even had access for such a long time. So I kind of got a little bit upset, and then I said, I was like, basically, let me give you an example of what happens when you don't have a female perspective in the room. And I gave the example of my cabinets. They are too tall, too high. The way that it's built, I can't reach it, right? And I gave the example, like on New Year's Eve, which is also my birthday, I was trying to pick something up from the top cabinet, and a jar fell onto my stove and it broke it. And then I'm trying to get somebody to come in and repair it, and the company that is supposed to repair it keeps postponing it. So I haven't had a stove for 27 days or so, right? So I said, look, this is an example of, because of that design, as a woman now, I haven't had a stove for like 20 something days. Now imagine historically how these kinds of things would have impacted women, their life quality, their nutrition, their, so many things. And he was like, so what do you expect us to do? Like to make everything shorter? And he's a very tall person. And he was like, you want me to make everything shorter? So then my back is going to hurt if I need to. And I was like, at that moment, you know what I said? I think you should leave. I was like, this conversation is over. So so poor guy, so basically he left, and I was like, okay, I'm not seeing you again. And then when he left, I was sitting there thinking about the cabinet, and I came up with an idea to solve that problem. And I was like, you know what? And then I contacted Lola, and I was like, Lola, we need to look into patenting my idea. So now I've got an idea for something that I can build and design to solve this problem for women.
Perfect. Great.
But that's
the date sounded great.
Yeah, but this is the example of like, you are having these kinds of conversations all the time when you get into a place of trying to explain your like, I'm trying to explain like what happens when you don't have female perspective. So on that note, I want to ask you two things about women and mathematics, because I know you're very good at math, and you that's your background. So question one, are women not as good as at math? And secondly, could it be possible that men and women learn math differently, and that maybe the school system, the education system, is teaching math in a way that is more conducive to the way that men learn it?
So yeah, like women are less intelligent than men. No, but the thing is, like, the reality is that people actually believe it. They won't say it, but the truth is like they really believe it. I was better than anyone else in my class. It's obviously like a data set of one. Math for me is like, it's like a painting. I find it really beautiful and very entertaining. And so my data set of one is probably not a generalization, but I do know that when I went studying pure maths and I was saying it, like I had the same eyebrows than when I was saying I was playing rugby. So they were like, ooh. I'm like, why you? Like, it's maths. It's like, it's not like, and there is like this massive stigma. And so I think it's more like encouraging, like, and even if you look at the toys, like toys for little girls, like often it's like pink ponies, and for boys it's like tumbling stone machine, or like a telescope, and they are targeted towards girls or boys. And then I had like this conversation with like some of mine. He's like a rugby player, and he had daughters. And he was saying, like, I really want my daughters to play rugby, but, I brought my daughter to a rugby match, and she was like, I want to, like, wear pink, and I want to be a princess. I was like, you brought her to watch a rugby of women? He said, no, of guys. And I'm like, she's so, like, big guys with massive beards, and you want her to associate herself to these guys? Obviously, she's not. And then like a lot of my friends are saying, like, we tried everything, but she loves pink. Like, yeah, kids are like, they're like, our brains are not really smart. We completely adapt to what we're seeing. So when you're seeing on a movie like a little girl who's wearing pink and blah blah blah, she associates herself with that person who has the long hair and is a girl, not to the boy. And that's a massive issue. Like from the very, very early age, we are completely ingrained. We're putting pink on a baby. Like the first thing she's wearing when she's out of the belly is a pink thing, and the boy is a blue. Like, it's completely stupid. So from early on, we like give toys to boys that are like a bit more technical, and it's fun, and it's like playful, and you're discovering and scientific, etc. And to girls, like magic ponies, and we tell them, and like the stories as well. When you read stories to kid, like the girl is like so useless, and she's waiting for this like charming prince to come and save her and like love her forever. No kidding that these girls are fucked up. They're waiting and no one's coming. Whereas the boys are like this, they need to attack and they need to come, and they're going to be rejected and need to like slay the dragon. That's what they're told. So of course they are like, they're going for it. It's like we're like, it's deeply ingrained in the way we are educated. And it goes the same for maths. Like, it's just like, very early on, we taught like maths it's a boys thing. So it's just like, yeah, we need to change the entire system. And no, women are really, really smart. And if you look at things that are like traditionally men, like medicine, now there's more doctors that are women. So it's absolutely not. And then the whole system then needs to change. We need to, like, I'm very strongly for compulsory equal paternity leave. if the whole system says that between 25 and 35-year-old, more or less, men and women are going to have a baby because that's what we want. We do not want people to like have, well, we just need babies, basically. Everyone's going to leave because having a child is a question of a man and a woman, not a woman's thing, because right now it's only a woman's thing. Then this entire society changes. It's a normal thing. It's not again, like it's not a bug anymore. It's a feature.
Justine Southall, who was managing director of Marie Claire magazine, who was on the first panel, she was like, children are not a women's issue, they're a family issue.
Yeah.
You know, it's like in the way that we are. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with pink. I like baby pink, you know, and I like baby blue. You know, like these are my pastel colors I quite like. And it doesn't make you any less intelligent to wear pink. Sometimes I used to, like I said, you know, I used to think like always black, you know, and leather, and you know, nowadays I just think about what's my mood today. You know, it's none of, and I don't care how people are going to judge. So last question. It's all good and well for women to start building these businesses, or for women to educate that. Yes, we are having more women going into these technical fields, but there is a difference between having more women in the field and having more women in the top tier. And what I'm trying to advocate is having more women in the top tier as well, you know, because when you look at the world is run by 10 companies, you know, there's 5 in the US, 5 in China. None of them are founded or run by women. And whenever I talk about having women in the top tier, people say, so are you talking about just like removing the CEO of Amazon and putting it? I said, no, I'm trying to encourage women building that. Like, instead of having, you know, that's all good and well, keep them where they are. But I also want to see another 5 companies that are similar, that are run by women, and so that we have a female perspective in where the decisions are made for the future of humanity. So how far would you say we are? Because when we look at the investment scene, 2019, I believe only 4% of the total investment funds have gone to women, right? 4% of the actual funds, and 8% in terms of a number of, you know, male, female. So that's a very long way to go. And what's your perspective on how things are going?
I'm reading a fascinating book called Endurance, and it's basically around like a scientific physiology of endurance and how you can explain records. So for instance, like the 2 hours marathon record, like breaking it. So there is like a physiological, scientific aspect to it, VO2 max and physiology of the human, etc., that says it is not possible to go faster than X. But then they're saying, what about the mental aspect of it? Because when you are racing, you are in a very different environments. And then there's this entire other thing, which is like the 4 minutes mile was nearly impossible, and it was working. And then after a few months, like everyone was breaking it. So like when you see it, it's actually, the brain just says it is absolutely possible. And the thing is that as humans, we're not that smart again, like the brain is not that intelligent. And so when we see things, we just think it's possible. So when we do not see a woman who's a CEO of a very large company, we directly associate the fact that she's probably not capable of doing that, and that no woman is capable of doing it. So that is like the mental shift that we need to transition. The very first one, like it is, we do not have examples. So obviously, like, men and women do not believe in it. And women themselves, when they are early stage, I'm trying to find role models for me to inspire me and like inspire my style, like my found like being a C-level style, like, and I'm struggling. Like there are not a lot of women who are similar to me on the top level. So I need to create this persona. So that's the first thing. And then at the very beginning, we need to push it much harder. And I'm really for quotas. Like, you know, if you are saying to a VC, you need to like invest in carbon neutral companies, I think you really can impose that, but I also think you can really impose the fact that you need to invest in women. And then you would say, oh, but you're gonna like downside the level of the companies we're investing in. That's not true. So like my question is like, you know, quotas in C-level position, like on board levels. So I'm like, okay, have you ever seen a president of a country who's not great? Maybe you've seen a few who are like not great. Have you ever seen a board member who's shit? Yeah, probably. So if you are imposing the quota that is like half men, half women, you're not actually lowering the level of the men. You're actually hiring the bar, because you're going to have incredible women. And for a man, it's just harder to get there because there are less seats. But you're not lowering it. So as a strong man, you're still going to get your seats. You just need to be better. And so it's actually, I think it's a really good thing to have quotas, and quotas in investing as well. Like you need to impose yourself investing, and you're just going to look harder. And when I have like all these people saying like, I'm really looking hard, but I can't invest in a female company, I'm like, well, you can invest in me, and you can invest in a lot of women. Like this is completely wrong. So like all these excuses are crap. And I think like the whole thing. So investing early, giving space for women to speak on panels, like what you're doing, interviewing more women, more visibility, like press. They should write articles, publishing a book. Like it is a marketing effort. So like promoting more women. Female sports, like if people would say, oh, it's less interesting, but that's not true. Like you have heavyweight and lightweight of boxing. It's two different sports entirely, similar to soccer. Female soccer, male soccer is very different. That's it. The people just need to shift. And the nice thing behind is that it's money. We're not talking about doing a charity. It's just people who go into that, they're gonna be rich.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Hélène. That's been great. It's been amazing. Very inspiring. And I really hope that it inspires more women because like you say, we don't have those kinds of role models and we have to create them and we have to be them.
Great talking to you. Thanks, Somi.
As always. Thank you, Hélène. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Hélène and Guillaume and found it as inspiring as I did. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or any other one of your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to give it a 5-star review. You can also find the full video of these conversations on my YouTube channel. Oh, and connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, or Clubhouse. Finally, if you're not a member of FemPeak yet, head over to fempeak.ai, register, and join a community that actively supports women.